Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Listen, we have a special edition of Your Healthy Java today. Also wanted to debut our new Your Healthy Java video and just realized that the format wasn't programmed to be working right. And so we want to introduce that as well as get ready to show you two videos. We have an extended version of Your Healthy Java today. As many of you know, on Saturday, we had the Your Healthy Java Health Fair, which was an awesome event from the community being served. People were vaccinated, registered for the bone marrow registry. You'll learn in the second panel how bone marrow can also help and cure sickle cell, which is a disease that disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. And so we're going to go ahead and let me just get things together here as far as our comments. Welcome to everybody that is in the room this morning. Let's go ahead. I just want to show you something that Props and I have been, mainly Props, but that we've been working on. So we're going to show that, and then we're going to show the videos from Saturday. So we'll be a little longer this morning, and we will be right back with you in just a couple of seconds. We just want to show you this debut of the new opening for Your Healthy Java. So shout out to my good friend and brother, Props McFly, that did that video. We did not have it queued up to, we did not have the proper format to drop it in the StreamYard. So we're going to go ahead and cast the conversations from Saturday. They are, listen, there were times in there where I was literally looking at the folks like, y'all want me to just go ahead and host this? And, you know, just not really give feedback based on what they were talking about. It was an amazing event. And so we're getting ready to share that with you now. The first panel is 42 minutes long and the second one is 44. So we'll be back with you let's say 9:08 by the time we get started. We'll be back about 9:50 to start the second panel. I am telling you, you definitely want to listen in and get all of this because they were just amazing. And so let's go ahead and get this set up for you. I believe I have everything all set. So let's go and make sure everything is good. Okay, there we go. We'll be back with you in 42 minutes. Good morning, everyone. My name is James Hills, and I'm the host of Java with Jimmy. And you are listening to a recorded segment at the Your Healthy Java Health Fair that took place on this past Saturday, October 1st, 2022. It was a great event, and part of the event is this panel that was conducted on Saturday that you are watching now. And so I have some wonderful guests, of course. our medical director and co-host, Dr. Alabre, our Dr. Ronke Peterson, our Dr. Jean Lambert, and also our Dr. Karen Abdul, who I believe is not part of the MGH system yet, but we'll find out. And so we're sort of abbreviated, but this panel that we're talking, or the topic we're talking from today, is from a term that I came up with, COVID Black. And what we're basically talking about is COVID, of course, the vaccination, and then also the impact or the trends in the Black community right now, or how do we stay healthy going forward. It is sort of an abbreviated session today. And so if you know, it's not as relaxed as Dr. Alabre and our guests usually are, but I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Karen. If you could tell just a brief, 30-second intro, like who you're associated with, and then how would you define, or what is a one-word response to the term COVID Black? A lot there.
Absolutely. Good morning. I'm Dr. Karen Abdul. I am the founder and director of Brilliant Psychiatric Services, which is a service that provides one-to-one care for psychiatric patients in addition to community education. And my second hat, and the one through which I'm here, is as the Mental Health and Wellness Director of the New England Medical Association, which is an association that serves the Black physicians in this area and supports their, my role there is to support their mental health and wellness. And my first response to COVID Black is critical.
It could be more than one.
Good. Okay, because that's not complete. Critically appropriate.
Critically, ooh, I like that. Critically appropriate. Dr. Lambert.
Good morning. I'm Jean Lambert, board certified in internal medicine and addiction medicine. I work at Mass General on our inpatient addiction counsel service, caring for patients with substance use and substance use disorders, commonly known as addictions. I'm also the medical director of that service. And when I think about COVID Black, I think the phrase I would associate with a healthy awareness.
Healthy awareness. Okay, so we're obviously not going to get away with one word today. Dr. Ronke Peterson.
Thank you.
Pedersen. Let me get that right.
Pedersen, yes. Thank you for having me. But my name is Ronke Pedersen, and I am a psychiatrist at Mass General. I'm an assistant professor at the medical school. I conduct NIH-funded research in stigma in mental health in the Black community and finding ways to address and reduce stigma. I'm also the director of research equity in something called the Clinical Trials Network and Institute at MGH Psychiatry, where we look at trying to ensure clinical trials are representative of the general population and include Black and brown people that we tend not to see in our clinical trials, which then affects our ability to use some of those drugs effectively in our community.
All right.
Oh, your word.
Your word.
My word. I was like, nobody would notice.
I should have noticed. I'm busy telling Dr. Alabre to go. Thank you, Karen.
I think I'll take a different approach. I think about recovery from a very traumatic period, a very traumatic 2 years, and
Yes.
how it's sorry, too many words, but this is how we'll find a way to summarize it, but how we're recovering from 2 years of trauma that we're all trying to get past too quickly sometimes.
I like that. Dr. Alabre.
All right. Hi, I'm Dr. Alabre, and I've been here a few times with Jimmy. I'm an internist at Mass General with my colleagues here, and a good portion of my work there is actually patient education in the community. So part of the MGH's equity and community care. And so here I am talking about yet another topic that we hope can be helpful to the Black and brown community in terms of awareness, education, and impact is the latest what we've been working on. And I still want to use the word equity when it comes to COVID Black. I think it's a loaded word, but it's an appropriate word.
Dr. Lambert, I'm going to start with you because when you were on the session before, you came to talk on about substance use and you gave a lot of clarity. We don't use the word abuse no more, things like that. We want to get as many nuggets out as possible. But you talked a lot about I remember you speaking to systems and things that are in place that had already had us set up as Black and brown people to be at the worst. And speaking of, even though this is called COVAC Black, I want to acknowledge one of Dr. Alabre's colleagues that is in the audience, Dr. Gladys Pachas, who is also a part of the Office of Equity and Community Health. And we're talking Black, but a couple of weeks ago for Hispanic Heritage Month, we had a session with Dr. Pachas and also Dr. Efren Flores. And so there's really not that much of a difference when we talk, Black and brown, but can you speak to a little bit about the history that even had us, prepped to be at the worst end of COVID and systems?
Well, I think when you look historically about federal policies, and regulations, and laws, and how they impact Black and brown individuals historically, and you look at many disease markers or disease states, we've historically been at a disadvantage. There's never been enough attention, appropriate attention. There's never been enough funding. And there's been, quite frankly, a historical racist approach when we think about healthcare in Black and brown communities. So when COVID began, those inequities, so historical inequities, became more prevalent. And I would say it's not only COVID, it's addiction, it's other chronic comorbidities and health conditions that affect brown and Black communities that we've always been behind. And so what I saw in COVID was an opportunity for us to bring forth these historical and current inequities and make sure that Black and brown people are at the forefront, just like our other sisters and brothers who we live with and function with on a daily basis. And so for me, when we talk about COVID Black and all these other health inequities, again, it's about being equal with everyone else in this country.
Dr. Abdul, let me ask you, and I'm so honored that both of our queens here today move in the space of behavioral health and psychology and psychiatry. And so can you speak to a little bit of the mental health impact? We're going to go to the impact of COVID the last 2 years, but just what Dr. Lambert just mentioned, that we are not in systems. We're in a system that just because of how you come in and view or identify the level of melanin, you may not get the same level of care, as I often say, of someone that's lighter and complected than me. And so what is the mental health impact of folks that have to consider that they want to go to the doctor, but they're like, I don't know. I referred to my sister often that she had to kind of like advocate because they were kind of brushing her off. The mayor referred to it a few minutes ago. So what is the mental health impact that you have to consider that when it comes to your health care, you're dealing with a system that may be racist? You say what you want to say. We're in church, but
Amen. So this is a tremendously loaded question, and I'm going to answer it a little bit of a roundabout way. So let me explain to everyone. I'm originally from the country of Trinidad and Tobago, and
Kuchala.
yes, sir.
Sorry, excuse me. Okay.
And doubles.
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Yes. So I came from a different framework of viewing race, where race was not at the forefront of our perspective on who someone was. When that person first came towards us, you were trying to understand who they were, rather than what hair texture they had or whatnot. I had to have a paradigm shift to live in the United States to understand people as groups rather than individuals. And within that context, I started working with being very interested in global health and refugee health. And I ended up in the refugee health space, where I learned because I am certified in global mental health through the Harvard program in refugee health, that there are comorbidities that affect traumatized populations the world over. Why am I saying this? Because you talk about mental health, and innocently so, as though our mental health is disconnected from the rest of our bodies. And I believe mental health to be a misnomer because mental health is a whole body and systemic issue. The dysregulation of the immune system is part of mental health dysregulation. And it's very clear that there's increased inflammation in the brain. When people have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, et cetera, there's an increase in hormonal dysregulation and multiple dysregulations throughout the body. So what we're talking about and what happens in these traumatized communities is that I was taught the model of systemic health for refugees, meaning we would have the expectation that as someone was traumatized mentally and physically, they would also have increases in obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, et cetera. Okay? And we treated from that perspective. All right, so we did not, for example, we had a group that was mindfulness and know your numbers. So understand what your A1C is, understand.
What's A1C?
Your A1C is an average measure of how high your glucose is. And so it tells somebody whether they have diabetes or not. That's a very simplified way to say this, okay? And so while we were educating people to understand their severity of their diabetes, we were also treating their diabetes in addition to medications with mindfulness and mental health awareness. And in these groups, this was the Cambodian refugees I was dealing with, and in these groups, 100% of the participants, this is extraordinary, brought their A1Cs down to normal levels. So I started this journey with the African American community, not clearly understanding the path of African American trauma in the United States, but seeing that there were parallels in these increased numbers. Increased rates of obesity, very high, increased rates of diabetes, increased rates of heart disease, et cetera, except the critical difference was that these things were being attributed to Blackness as opposed to trauma.
Exactly. I'm like,
and that rendered the African American community powerless because you cannot change your Blackness.
But you can address your trauma.
You can address your trauma. You can address your trauma.
Oh, y'all can clap. It's a little different today.
And so I started trying to understand why the African American community was not being framed and understood in the context of all these other communities as a community that had been traumatized historically and had these high rates of issues because of that. And so that is the way that I started addressing things medically. And so when COVID came along, and I know we are back to your answer.
Yes.
It made perfect sense that there would be higher rates of COVID infections among African Americans because with 400 plus years of trauma, immune systems are severely dysregulated. So
she said you up that.
So we're talking about to the point of genetics and to the point where DNA. So when people are constantly anxious, and you can speak to this too, Dr. Pedersen, when people are persistently anxious and traumatized, there are actually proteins that begin to snip away at DNA, and people's lives become shortened. There is a reason that Black men and women have shorter lifespans in the US. So when you combine the physiological dysregulation in African Americans with these issues in social determinants of health, where they are not getting access to the right care, you have a situation where there's a severe disadvantage. And more than that, because people are not taught that this is a whole body thing, they believe that their mind is the problem and they're not, quote unquote, strong enough.
Dr. Abdul, there's so much there, and it's going to, there was almost an uh-oh moment that Dr. Labre and I refer to often, and I'm watching Dr. Moranke, and I'm like, because I'm going to ask her to talk about, because what you talked about was, COVID wasn't, you weren't talking about in the context of COVID. No. We were talking about what Dr. Lambert said about all the systems that pre-COVID set us up to be impacted, but then you further clarified, it wasn't the fact that we were per se Black, and also combined with the social determinants of health and in a system that is, you know, not designed to treat us fairly. But then you took into context the fact that we're not maybe as a group or as a society looking at addressing the trauma versus that because we're Black. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to some that may be elementary, but to hear you articulate it, I was like, wow, that is major. Dr. Ronke, we've talked before about our last session, I think that you were at, we started talking about faith and health. And I think at one point before we did talk about that for African Americans, trauma can be genetically carried in the DNA. So let's speed up to COVID. The impact, and I'm so, you know, I wish we had longer time, and maybe we're going to have to do a part 2 of this, this session here, but the mental impact of everything that they just talked about to where we are now. Where are we?
Well, first of all, follow up to all of that. I think it's all, so much is in there. And I think the things that I would add is sometimes when we think about trauma, you're thinking about the individual who's experiencing trauma. We think a lot of times when we talk about trauma, PTSD in the military, like you think about what you, the individual, are experiencing. Some of what we don't always think about is who's causing the trauma. Mm-hmm. And where's the trauma coming from? You said this statement, this phrase is very important, the historic and the current. And I think what's very hard is, and I'll give the example of maternal mortality in pregnancy, because that's another one where we saw that, you know, number that I think a lot of us in our community are very traumatized by, the 3 to 4 times higher. Mm-hmm. So for COVID death, it was 3 to 4 times higher in the Black community. For maternal mortality, it's 3 to 4 times higher among Black pregnant women and postpartum, you know, mothers. And why that trauma piece, I think it's important to, you know, to add to that in terms of racism and this question of moving. And I think 2020 helped us with this in the scientific literature, away from race-based studies where it's like, you know, Black people experience this because, you know, this happens more in Black people and there's this focus on the skin color, as opposed to Black people are experiencing this not because of something inherent to our, you know, just comfort with suffering. Our bodies are not supposed to be comfortable with suffering, but because of these external forces, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to deal with my trauma today and it's going to be all, you know, I'm going to be all fine. Mm-hmm. But it's because of the ongoing piece of it. And I think that the one distinction there too is like, for some of the refugees, they've come out of that trauma. Like they've come out of that trauma and now they're not experiencing it over and over again every day. Whereas for Black people in this country, you walk into a health system that was built in such a way that systemically, structurally, you're meant to be excluded from it. Mm-hmm. And the minute you walk into that space, you feel that exclusion already, mm-hmm. not just from what people are doing to you, but from the mayor talked about kind of this feeling inside, this feeling of, maybe I need to get that test done sooner. Why are they telling me it's going to be 3 months from now or 4 months from now? And paying attention to that, because it has to do with this ongoing aspect of this racial trauma and racism. And I think COVID didn't show us anything that many in the Black community, most of the Black community already, you know, didn't already know. If anything, everyone else around us, like around the Black and Brown community, was like, oh, I didn't realize it was so bad. And we're like, we've been saying it was really bad this whole time.
Go ahead. This is a conversation. Dr.
Yeah, I mean, this research is not new. I'm talking about research that was published in, 1998 by people like, the Study of American Life, Dr. David Williams. It's very clear. This is not new. It just has never transitioned into the medical space. And the big question is why?
Let me ask this to be fair to Dr. Labre to bring him in. You're a primary care physician. Where are things, if you were to compare and contrast pre-COVID and now, are they coming more for routine and preventative care? The mayor talked about screenings. Our Rick Lee is going to talk about in the second panel, the cancer screenings and things like that. Where are we with primary care pre and post COVID, considering everything that our panelists said?
Sure. I mean, it's certainly changing
Okay.
a lot. I think probably most things won't go back to what they used to be before COVID, honestly. Some of them for hopefully the better, and some of them maybe for the worse. And that's what we're fearing and hoping that we can intervene on before it's too late. Because sometimes we tend to wait a little bit too long to act on things that are not working. So we certainly are seeing an increase in care, or at least people seeking care. There is a little bit more awareness. If we want to center this around COVID itself, I think people are reaching out more than they used to. And that's translating into reaching out for other things, where now, unfortunately, the medical system can be a bit overwhelmed with the number of questions we are getting every day on all aspects of health. It's good, but now we need to address the infrastructure so we can respond to that demand. Because I think people are a little bit more attuned to active diseases, infections, whatever is going on. There's so much on the news and being talked about, and people are hearing from their family members and what they went through, what they experienced, and also hoping that they don't wait too long. And I think one of the things I wanted to mention with what we're saying here is that we know there's been discrepancies in access to care, in care outcome in different racial groups, which we now know have talked about for a long time. That is not always just the race. It's actually about the social determinants of health. And so now what I'm a little bit concerned about is that as we recognize these things, and hopefully someone somewhere is addressing some of them, it's going to take time. But we don't want to miss out on the ability to actually change the outcome of care that we can while we can. And I remember one of the talks we had before, you had mentioned, Blacks have been left behind for 400 years. Let's not be left behind again. And to make this more relevant to COVID is one of the reasons I sort of became even more active in outreach and care, is that we can't wait for this pandemic to go through to address why people didn't get care, didn't get the vaccine, didn't do what they needed to do. So as we work on improving the infrastructure, the care access, all these other racist and things that are impacting people's care, let's also do what we can right now. And luckily, we do have organizations like MGH and lots of other hospitals who are going into the communities. And we hope that people will show up, and this is great. We have quite a bit of a turnout today, and people will take advantage of these things while we work on fixing and addressing these things. Because by the time you've been affected, and forget it, if you actually lost your life, we can't go back and fix that. So we want to be able to do what we can right now, currently, as we fix things so that the next one hopefully is better. And that also we can learn our experiences from this pandemic to also address mental health, if we want to still call it that, and other kinds of health and heart disease and diabetes and cancers and all these other things, because there's a lot of work left to be done.
There is definitely a lot of work, and this is definitely a part of it, the information and education. We are in an abbreviated session, and I know that our panelists have a lot more to share. I'm sitting here sort of dumbfounded about a lot of the stuff that Dr. Abdul have shared. And if we had more time, I'm sure Dr. Lambert and Dr. Ronke would share a lot of things that would really have us sitting here going, is Arsenio Hall, our younger folks, I remember used to go, but one of the things that we do in the platform is we want to allow, if anyone here has any questions or any comments, we want to have that opportunity. And Walker, if you don't mind turning the mic around, if anyone has a comment or any questions, you are definitely welcome to ask or say so, because I heard you over there bubbling when you were listening, but we want to offer that now. If you all don't, we're not going to, okay, see. There you go. And this young lady is not on camera, but we will,
Okay, yeah, I don't want to.
you're good.
Yes, I was just, as soon as I came in, I was like, wow, I was just going through an episode today. I come from like a traumatic, like whole life, like my whole life right now. I feel like it's like, it just doesn't exist. Like from what I know, everything's a lie. Like my whole existence is a lie. And I've like went through a lot of traumatic experiences from even being born till even now. And I'm like in my 40s. And so it's just like, even today, I just went through something. I just like broke down and I was just like, wow, all my problems and all my situations, they're not really me. They're from other people and other things. And I just feel like, why am I still living with it every day? And I go through a lot. And I have so much on my plate. It's like I'm alone, and I have like a lot of like if I can't even let you look into my life. Just what I see every day is just bombarded. Sometimes it could be a spiritual thing. Some people say spiritual, but my whole thing, what I want to say, because I was listening to like you were saying something about like the trauma, but I noticed like when it took me to go through different experiences to really reach out for help with mental health and to actually be like admit it, accept it, and to just say, all right, let me take is for me, just say what I wanted to really say is like everybody that look like me in my community, I come from like Roxbury, Mattapan and everything. And like a lot of people, they're not on my level as far as like mental health. Like I have a therapist, I have psychiatry, I've been through different medications. I was always told like you can like medication, you take medication, you're cuckoo, or medication it will hurt you in the long run. It makes you more sicker. So I'm trying to go through holistic ways. I've been trying to do everything just to see, like, go through spirituality, go through prayer, and it don't seem like it's working. So what I came to realize is that it's not how to get rid of it. It's just how to live with it. How can how can it be easy? So today what I did was, so today what I did to deal with it was like, I got out the house.
And we're glad you're here.
Like, I got the house. I ended up here. And it was like, and then y'all talking about the same exact thing that I was just going through this morning. And it's just like, I just want to know, how can y'all like tell my community, tell our community that these things are out there, they really help? Because I be dealing with people that have mental health issues and I can see it, even though they don't know that it's mental health issues, but I'll recognize it. And even people on the streets, when they're like, people call them bums or they're on drugs and they act up and somebody else wants to act up with them. And it's like, no, let them just talk. Let them just do whatever. Don't interfere with that, because they're dealing with issues. You don't know what other people are dealing with. And I
let me chime in here, ma'am, just because for time's sake. One of the things I wanted to say is when you say how, you're one. You may not have been here earlier, but the mayor came in and kind of formally, what's the proper pronunciation? Deputized everybody that was here as sort of healthcare ambassadors. And so you're a part of it. I'm sure we don't have the Department of Psychiatry represented here today, but we can figure out a way to maybe help you get some information. So as you're casually talking to people, because keep it 100, people from the community are the best ambassadors and outreach workers, among your peers and whatnot. And so thank you so much. Let's give her a hand.
But my issue, first of all, I want to say something, one more thing.
Very quickly.
Yes, my issue is like with DMH and everything, with all those services. You go in there, you tell them your problems, and then sometimes they push you away. You don't hear back from them. You know what I mean? Then you have to relive that over and over again. You have to go through the
cycle.
Not even a cycle, but you have to go through like a phase. Like you have to go through putting out the application, telling them your story, and then they have to decide whether you fit the criteria and then they could deny you. Then you're waiting on lists like for therapy. My son, I was supposed to put him on therapy for a while ago because he was going through some stuff, and they had a waiting list for 4 months.
It's the systems that you speak to. We're definitely going to follow up after this session and figure out how we can get you some information. There was somebody here from DMH earlier, so if he's, so we'll connect you with him.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Let's give her a hand. Did either Dr. Ronke or, and I know, you know, there was a systems reference there too, Dr. Lambert, and I'm almost afraid to let you go, but what do you have a response to what this sister said? I heard you say layers, not so much cycle, but layers of applications, medication, DMH. Is it still DMH? Is it still DMR? And so Dr. Lambert, maybe you can reply to that, and then we have room for maybe one more question or comment.
I would just like to thank that sister for sharing her story
Yeah.
and your journey. And I would tell you that's not unique. It's very common. And the fact that you've actually owned your trauma and tried to address that trauma is the first important step. But you articulate some of the things that people like you and myself struggle with. When we want to seek help and answers, the layers are so profound. And we as Black people and brown people have to address so many layers. And not all of us have actually versed in how the medical system works and how to navigate it. And we felt alone. And what
Like, they're not my color skin. They can't relate to my story.
Yeah.
They can't identify with what I'm going through.
Yeah.
We have,
Taking notes, researching me as an individual. Being Black.
Yeah. But I think
Thank
the point that you articulate very well, and what I originally talked about when we talked about COVID Black and healthy awareness, I always talk about, we're talking about systems, but also about the individual and how the individual understands the trauma, the impact of trauma in their lives, where that trauma started, whether it's a child, adolescent, young adult, or as an adult. And actually, how do we address that trauma, prioritize where we are in terms of our life and dealing with that trauma? And the more important thing where we're really focusing on, where we talk about the systemic issues with the historical and current racism and medical racism, is how do we get the help we need? Because we're just like everybody else struggling with the same trauma. It doesn't matter what the color of our skin is. That shouldn't be the determinant of how we get help in this country.
thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Keith Crawford from Finn. One thing I wanted to say, I have a couple of things, but
Just
what's
one
very
go.
important
What time?
was as the fact that you were the first group that I've heard to bring up post-traumatic stress in relationship to slavery.
It's interesting because we've named it a few times, and go ahead, because, oh God, I wish we had more time. Go ahead.
So that's important. And then something else that comes in from my background is in more cellular biology. And when you bring up the relationship becoming immunocompromised in relationship to stress, in relationship to cancers, in relationship to autoimmune diseases, and why Black men and Black women and brown brothers and sisters are all becoming immunocompromised. And that's why there may be an earlier onset for breast cancer, more aggressive diseases, or the early onset of prostate cancer in Black men.
To sit here and have to fathom the correlation you're making with what was shared, and I think it was Dr. Ronke, that there are just certain prostate cancer in Black men, breast cancer in Black women, high blood pressure in Black people, diabetes in Black people. It's become a norm. And we've embraced, and Dr. Patches, is it the same within the Hispanic Latino community? It's become a norm. And which is what Dr. Abdul, if you all don't mind, if Dr. Abdul could sort of close us out, because we got to get back downstairs and get you all to eat, and then we got to come back for another panel. But this just says that we have to do a lot more. The Zoom and the, all that is good, but even recording. I mean, if we just maybe come and have conversations, forget recording in your healthy Java, but just build with our community and people. Dr. Abdul, if you could close this segment out. Thank you so much, sir.
I want to say, I want to accentuate this. This was the first time I've heard that concept, trauma in relationship to slavery, in relationship to every day. we are faced with trauma.
The other piece is I'm sorry, the difference of, you said that people were getting better with the refugees because they were pulled out of it, but we are in a cyclical thing.
So I want to add to what Dr. Ronke said. Again, comparing how refugees are treated, there is an extensive Harvard trauma questionnaire that we do. Literally, you could spend several sessions with a refugee asking about everything from physical trauma, beatings, gun violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, chronic pain, all of these different things. Extensive questionnaire to understand the holistic pattern of what people have been through. And in stark contrast, I don't know that many Black men, but a few hundred. Every Black man I know has had a negative experience in this country with law enforcement.
I got pulled over the other night.
Some people.
That's my mother, y'all.
Right. Some men have been beaten, held at gunpoint, choked, and this is considered such a norm that there is no assessment of this.
When you say assessment, do you mean of the mental health, not the system, but of the impact? We see it on TV, George Floyd, me the other night.
So I'm talking about in my training as a psychiatrist.
Yes.
There was never any part of my training that says, if a Black man comes into your office and complains of mental health issue, ask him about beatings, being held at gunpoint, being pulled over inappropriately, and all of these things under the color of law, which by the UN definition of torture is torture. And I'm saying this, I know in the public, but I am telling, because we had to learn all of this. We had to learn the definition of a refugee versus an asylee. We had to learn what torture was in order to understand and treat refugees. And as I said, I saw all of these parallels in the African-American community with no treatment.
Oh, no training.
And no training, okay? And so there is a level of mismatch of what the community experiences. Community psychiatry is not well understood. And so we have to start from the individual, dysregulated attachment in the family, how it affects the community, and how this has affected people historically from slavery up to this time. It takes 5 generations after people are pulled out of a traumatic situation for the community to recover.
So wait, based on what you just said there, 5 generations, we've been in this country since around, I believe, 1619. And so this is 2022.
And the trauma still continues.
And it's cyclical.
Yes.
And it's always evolving because with the thing about the 13th Amendment and all right.
So what is remarkable, because I want to end on a high note.
Yes, please.
What is remarkable about the African-American community has been its resilience in the face of enormous trauma, where we are actually pushing forward. 70% of Black people are upwardly mobile. Okay, yes, we are. Despite this, we are thinking through how to move forward. Our rates now of substance abuse, because substance abuse is one thing you look at in refugee populations, there are high rates of substance abuse. And of course, people are beaten and they're shot at and they're, chopped in the head and whatever, okay? And they're trying to get this stuff. They watch their children be killed, their fathers be killed in front of their eyes, okay? Our rates of substance abuse are now the same as the regular population. So despite the fact that we are not really seeing relief, we are still moving forward as a community. And that is a testament to our resilience. That being said, we do have, and this was the key question you asked, which we did not really address, statistically, some really big mental health issues, okay? So statistically, historically, our community has had, technically, supposedly, lower levels of depression and anxiety. Whether that is because people are not reporting, we don't know. Here is what we do know. Now that reports are starting to come out, we're starting to find some extraordinary things. For example, for professional Black women, the pandemic was actually helpful. They were away from the microaggressions in their offices. I am dead serious because I looked at these statistics.
We got a doctor.
And
Go ahead. We're strapped for time, and I want to.
So
there is so much, and I want to apologize to my panelists. I know you understand, in the community and time, and being sensitive to the community. And the mayor showed up, but we will have to figure out how to do an in-person part 2 with this panel, if you all don't mind coming back. Dr. Lambert said, of course, and not on a time limit, like a 6 o'clock evening, and we have the place 6 to 9, and just talk. But these folks, I believe, are going to stick around for a few minutes as we get ready to go downstairs and have lunch. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and go off the camera. Yeah. So you were listening. I got a few things going on here, y'all. So you were listening to let me turn this down here. So you were listening to the first panel, Kovac Black. And I mean, that Dr. Karen Abdul, of course, Dr. Labre, Dr. Ronke, and Dr. Lambert definitely shared some nuggets as well. But the way Dr. Abdul broke down from a systemic macro standpoint, how this country, how the health industry is dealing with our cyclical trauma, it was very, very interesting to hear. Listen, in this next panel, I know we're extended today, but if you know someone that has sickle cell, that is dealing with sickle cell, that is dealing with cancer, that is dealing with prostate cancer or breast cancer, has a history of it. We had a young man get up, and you'll see in the panel, we had a young man get up and say he was advocating with his doctor to get tested. He has 3 generations of those before him that have lost their lives to prostate cancer, and he feels like he has to be more aggressive to get his doctor to get him screened. And so we're going to hear about that in just a few moments. We're getting ready to cast our second panel that is going to be talking about stopping the power of cancer. So let's get that queued up for you here. That one is about 45 minutes long, and we will wrap up after that this extended version of Your Healthy Java today. And so please tag someone, share with someone that you know is dealing with sickle cell, and we're going to go right into our second panel, Stopping the Power of Cancer. That is featuring Jason DeLeon. I don't remember the young lady's name who is the nurse navigator for the sickle cell program at MGH. She named many times at MGH. This is new for them, being very intentional about dealing with the sickle cell population. And as most of those that are dealing with sickle cell are Black and brown, there are some other things that she mentioned that they're working on at MGH. So we're going to share that panel with you now, and we'll be back in just a few moments. Good morning, everyone. My name is James Hills, and I'm the host of Java with Jimmy. And similar to our last session, you were listening to a pre-recording. In our last session, as you know, we had the Your Healthy Java Health Fair that took place on Saturday, October 1st. This is the second panel. I'm sure you enjoyed the broadcast of the first panel, Kovac Black. The folks that they were here, you can obviously see we're still in the same setup. But we're getting ready to talk about, in this particular panel, and I think and I don't know how many of you were up here for the first panel, but we talked about Kovac Black, COVID, the vaccination impact on the Black community. And one of the things that came out of that panel was that realizing that years and decades of genetic and generational trauma are causing compromised immune systems, which can, and I heard someone talk about examples of breast cancer and other things. And so I think this is a good correlation to talk about how we stopping the power of cancer. And one would think from just the medical aspect, but I'm sure there'll be some conversation around the social determinants of health that even lead to us being in the world where we have cancer. We're talking about stopping the power of cancer, and I will be corrected if I'm wrong, but we're going to learn about two other sort of not as popular topics when we talk about cancer. One is bone marrow as it relates to helping and curing leukemia and lymphoma, and also sickle cell. I believe if I heard one of our wonderful nurse practitioners at Mass General, Leah Gordon, we were talking and planning. If I heard her right, I think I remembered her say that sickle cell is a type of or cancer type, or could be. If I'm wrong, clarify it when you speak. But and your eyebrow says that I was wrong. Okay, so anyway, stopping the power of cancer through registering for the bone marrow registry, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about sickle cell. And so I'd like to ask one of our sponsors of this panel in today's event, Jason from the Be the Match program, to introduce himself. Well, I just did it for him, but introduce himself. And I would ask you, Jason, and all of you this question as you end your introduction. What grade would you give, I would say, the United States when it comes stopping the power of cancer? So Jason, if you could introduce yourself and answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Jimmy. My name is Jason DeLeon, and I am a clinical operations partner for the National Marrow Donor Program, Be the Match. Happy to be here. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to raise awareness and to provide education, especially for the Black and brown population, on closing the gap and providing more equitable access to transplant for patients. As a grade for the U.S. in terms of our ability to stop the power of cancer, I'd say, especially recently with the administration's focus and investment in stopping cancer, I'd say we're probably getting to like a C+ maybe. So hopefully the emerging, especially in the cell and gene therapy world for transplant, some of those developments continue to evolve and grow, and we have a better opportunity of doing that, especially for patients that have hematological malignancies and blood disorders.
My name is Sharon Amos. I am a nurse navigator for the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Program.
Did you say nursing navigator?
Nurse navigator.
Nurse navigator. You got to tell us.
I will. For the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Program at Mass General. I'm actually relatively new to the team. The program has grown tremendously over the past year and a half or so.
We're in real time recording, and so we're just making sure that we can hear you. Good, wonderful.
Okay.
I think you're good.
Are we good? So our role as nurse navigators are basically to support and just really take care of the patients coming through the hospital system.
Okay.
So we literally are navigators for them to help them navigate the system. Going to appointments, we have a phone that they can contact us directly and let us know if they need prescriptions filled or need rides for appointments to come to the hospital. When patients come into the hospital or into the emergency room, we go to their bedside and just make sure that they have what they need, take care of any concerns that they have. And a big role that we also have is educating staff. And so nursing and providers of our patients. Sickle cell is rather new to the Mass General Hospital. So there are a lot of folks that aren't familiar with the disease. And there's a lot of guidance that is required around the care of this really unique group of folks. Sickle cell is a at least century-old genetic blood disorder that affects many
and not
things.
cancer. So to clarify, not a type of a cancer type.
Not
Thank
a
you.
cancer. But I think because we kind of are in the cancer center, so under the umbrella.
Okay, so I wasn't totally off there. Okay.
So we're under the oncology cancer center umbrella, but it's not a cancer.
Okay.
But it's a very old genetic disease that has been neglected historically, and like I said, there's the people that are at the hospital taking care of the folks are not always familiar with how to care for them. So we provide guidance and education and support to patients and families.
And is a nurse navigator a new term for what I used to be in medicine called nurse case manager? Is it similar or is it different?
It's different.
It's different. Okay.
Different. Because we're more involved with the clinical care of the patient.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. I think it's kind of awesome, but then it makes me go a little bit that a hospital created a position called nurse navigator. That just can't go by. I mean, it's a good thing that they help, but we were talking in our earlier segment about systems and structures that kind of make it a little difficult for patients to navigate the system. I'm going to skip my good friend because he's not a guest. He's a veteran in the Java Cafe. So I'm going to, Dr. Moore.
Hi, my name is Beverly Moy. I'm a medical oncologist at Mass General Cancer Center, and I specialize in breast cancer care. And to get to your question from before, what grade would we give on how we're doing with cancer? I actually think I'm going to divide that into two parts. The overall grade, I think, is probably a solid B+, because we've made tremendous advancements in the treatment of cancer with individualizing treatment, molecular markers, harnessing the immune system in fighting cancers. There's never been a time to be more hopeful if you're diagnosed with cancer. But I would say that when it comes to cancer inequities and closing disparity gaps from underserved patient populations such as minority race, ethnicity, low socioeconomic status patients, I think we're at a D, a grade D. We have to do much, much better. And I think that's why many of us are here today, because it's about time that became the biggest #1 priority in cancer.
Okay, Dr. Moy is going to give us, Dr. Labry's in the audience. We have these, what we call uh-oh moments when something is said and the activist in me sort of wants to respond. Dr. Lee has been a guest on Java. So he's familiar. You've been a guest on Java with Jimmy before, very familiar with the platform. We retweet each other and tweet. And so please introduce yourself. And I would ask you, and I know Dr. Moy probably ending off of the inequities piece. I know she set you up to your response or the grade is going to be interesting because I just kind of know you.
Yep.
And so please introduce yourself as well.
Very pleased to be here. My name is Rick Lee. I'm a medical oncologist, also at Mass General Cancer Center. I focus on genitourinary cancers. That includes prostate cancer, kidney, bladder, and testicular cancer, but the primary focus is on prostate cancer. I'm here to talk about prostate cancer today. And some of the work that we do is looking at doing research and clinical trials and also translational studies in prostate cancer. We have a wide program at MGH. The grade that I would give the US is actually a C. I really liked the way you broke it down because that is exactly how I balance things. I was going to say that a C because we're doing such great work in cancer advances, but we're doing horribly when it comes to access to care. And when we think about all of the things that we should be doing better, all the ways that we can make improvements in providing care to patients, it's really about access. And so I'm here to back you up, Dr. Moy.
Thank you.
Oh, God. This is going to be interesting. Jason, I'll come back to you. We've heard of bone marrow transplants. We are aware of bone marrow, just the term itself. Why now is there Be the Match? Why is there this sort of aggressive, assertive, which is a good thing, that Be the Match is doing in I believe in general, but maybe there is some focus in Black and brown communities. Why Be the Match? Why is it in place? And then what is the goal?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a focus on creating equity and more access to cellular therapy for all patients. One of our goals is to democratize cell therapy. And the organization has been around for about 35 years. So we've been facilitating stem transplants for quite a while. But since then, there is this unfortunate fact that there's disparity on the registry. So a patient's chances of finding a matched donor, unfortunately, are not equal depending on their ethnic background. So for the Black and brown population, for example, if you're Hispanic or Latinx or Asian, like me, you have less than a 50% chance of finding a matched donor on the registry. If you're Black or African American, it's actually less than 30%. So, and this is in comparison to a white non-Hispanic patient who has about a 79% chance of finding a match. So there is a great disparity on the registry, and our goal and our focus is to create awareness, to create education, and to create access so that we can diversify our registry and open up more chances that Black and brown population has a chance to find a match.
That is so interesting that number is so large between African American community, 79% for non-African American or Latinx. And then with Asian, you said Latinx 50 and under or around there. And then Black.
49% for Asian or for Hispanic and 48 or 47% for Asian.
Wow. And anybody can sort of jump in here, and I want to spend some specific time on sickle cell as well, but I've heard Dr. Moy refer to, and then we hear these terms a lot: equity, access, and awareness. And so what are the barriers when it comes to access and awareness? And all of you can jump in here. Let's really just have a frank conversation.
Well, I can start about access, because that's really, I think, there's so many factors that go into why these disparities exist in survival and outcomes in cancer, in sickle cell, what have you, but access is the most important piece. And what we consider access is certainly a person having the ability to get quality cancer care. And that's a very important part. It has to do with insurance. You know, in Massachusetts, we're fairly lucky in that there's universal insurance coverage, but other states do not do as well. And you know, that's access to insurance. But that's not everything. Just because you have access to insurance, it doesn't mean that the insurance plan gives you what you need if you're diagnosed with cancer. It may not cover everything, like clinical trials that Dr. Lee talked about, or genetic testing, or things like that. And then there are other pieces like that come into access. And you mentioned social determinants of health. There's so many things in a person's life that gets in the way of a patient from an underserved population being able to get to the doctor's appointments. So having the resources that are available and assistance that people need. I mean, having someone like Sharon be a nurse navigator, we need to clone people like that in different health systems and think of a more patient-centered way so that they can get in for care. So that's a huge part of the access component in equity.
Maybe if I can jump to Sharon real quick. Are people surprised when you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be your nurse navigator? What is the response?
It's shock and amazement.
Okay.
As we've said, historically, this has been a really neglected cohort of folks that just have not gotten care. I think in pediatrics, the care is better.
Yeah.
Just because they're kiddos and there's a lot more in terms of medical programs and things for younger people. But once they go into adulthood and then life starts getting a little more complicated, and in sickle cell disease, as you age, the pain episodes kind of increase, and we know that stress can cause that. So life gets more complicated, and you kind of interacting with the healthcare system can be challenging because now you're a person of color showing up to the emergency room looking for narcotics, and you're automatically stigmatized, and it can be really challenging getting the care you need. So people avoid the healthcare system as they get older, unfortunately. So the care drops off, and these folks need to be followed, and they need screenings, you know, for their eyes. And this it's a blood disease that can affect any part of their body, their bones, their organs, the liver, kidney, the eyes. So they really need to be followed consistently. And unfortunately, the care can fall off just because of how difficult it is to interact with healthcare and the stigma around being Black and brown and needing pain medicine often. Yeah.
Any response there, not necessarily to either the sickle cell or the system and awareness and the piece about equity, and because what I'm afraid of is there was a period I was involved in an organization and there was a lot of volunteerism. Volunteerism is sexy. And it became sort of this sort of cliche, and I just don't want, and not this group, but as a society, I want us to be keenly focused on these areas of equity, inclusion, and awareness and access.
Yeah, so I think about access a lot, especially as when we think about prostate cancer as a specific example. Black and African American men have a higher rate of being diagnosed with prostate cancer, about 60% higher than white Americans, and more than double the death rate from prostate cancer. So when we think of it in those terms, we then think, well, is the disease different? Is there something different about their response to therapy? Well, we haven't actually found that to be true. But what we have seen is that there are examples where patients or people who have the same access to care. There's a big study from the VA that described that these Black vets and white vets who actually had the same access to care, all the social determinants of health would have really gone against the Black vets. Lower income, lower high school graduation rate, higher PSA, lower age at diagnosis, and yet their prostate cancer outcomes were similar or better in terms of metastatic rate, death rate, survival. So what's the difference? They had access to care. They actually were in a closed system where they actually had insurance. They were screened for prostate cancer. So it's possible to perhaps tamp down on these big disparities with access. And that's just one example. And if we are able to think about that as an example and expand upon it, but then we also have to reach out to the patients themselves. They have to be advocates for themselves. Patients' families need to be advocates for them as well. I always tell my colleagues and friends that it's not just the men, it's also all those people in their lives, including mostly the women in their lives, that help drive them to talking about PSA screening prostate cancer and actually seeing the doctor, because a lot of men don't. So there's the access part, and then there's also the advocacy part. And that's the part where we can come out and talk about these things and volunteer to help make people more aware of these major issues that hopefully are preventable.
It's interesting that we talk about awareness because I've heard of bone marrow transplant, but I wasn't aware of Be the Match. I wasn't aware that there's this aggressive movement, and you've been around for 35 years. And so, Jason, what has been the response of a lot of Black and brown folks? Let's say in the best case, and I don't know if you don't do the clinical end, but are you aware that what the patient's response is, or generally when they say, hey, are they even aware that bone marrow transplant or stem therapy, am I saying it right? Stem cell therapy, I'm thinking STEM from our education stuff here in Massachusetts, Boston. Stem cell therapy, what has been the response when either your colleagues or just from hearing anecdotes in the office? Because we're going to name that Jason is not a clinician. He just thought it was important to be here today to make sure that we had an opportunity to have the top head guy here, but we weren't set up to do it that way. But what have been the anecdotes that you've heard about when people say, here's a possibility for you to address your leukemia or your lymphoma?
Yeah.
Lymphoma, rather.
I think anytime someone hears that they can affect a life, it's obviously amazing.
Yep.
And encouraging that somebody can make a small donation and potentially be providing a life-saving.
So you don't have to be, I was going to say kin. I'm tired, so I'm using casual words. You don't have to be related to the person to do the bone marrow?
No, not necessarily. I think 30% of patients who are seeking a stem cell transplant may be able to find a related donor that matches them. So for the 70% that don't have someone in their family that's a match, they rely on Be the Match to find a match donor. And I think anecdotally, it's complicated. I think there's a lot of positive reactions and encouraging reactions that someone can make a difference, but there are also very important cultural considerations and education and room that we can gain on to help improve awareness and improve the education on what it is to donate and what the commitment is, because commitment's a big deal for those who like to be on the registry. So I've seen the gamut, but I think anytime that somebody can provide a life-saving cure with a couple minutes of your time and some commitment, I think it's amazing.
Dr. Moy, let me ask you again in this sort of vein, we talk about access, awareness, inclusion, and equity. Where do you believe things are, not just in your specialty, but in the earlier panel, we talked about systems, legislation, and structure, infrastructure within medicine. Where are we?
So I think that there are some good things, but some really bad things that we have to fix in the healthcare infrastructure. So certainly, having access to good insurance varies state by state. So since I'm a breast cancer specialist, we can look at the disparities, the cancer death gaps from breast cancer. There is every single state and the District of Columbia, Black women die at higher rates than white women. There's not a state that does not occur.
Is there any indicators into, and this is a conversation so we can all jump in, are there any key indicators that they're finding in the latest research as to why?
Yes. And actually, there's a big conference going on right now in Chicago looking at, and there was
Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
The conference.
but there was just a study that was presented today that Medicaid expansion reduces death from cancer because it provides insurance. And if you look at the states that do better, they're the ones that expanded Medicaid. So that's a big policy thing that has to happen. And then we have to reform Medicaid to make sure that if you have Medicaid, you actually get what you need if you're diagnosed with cancer. And that's not trivial because that's a state by state decision. So Alabama and Massachusetts might have different provisions that Medicaid will provide for. So that's a big policy issue that has to be addressed. I will also say from the healthcare system side, at the panel you had earlier, there was someone who made a comment that really struck me, where she said every Black or African American man she knows had a negative experience with law enforcement.
Dr. Abdul.
Right, and I would say that's virtually true for every Black or African American person in the healthcare system as well. That there's been a negative interaction, or any institution in the United States, whether it be banking or education or whatever. And that means you're providing access, but we have to make it better for people to want to come. So that's awareness. People like us, making sure that once folks come in to see us, they have a great experience, that it is patient-centered, that they get what they need, and that we care. So that's a huge part of the infrastructure that is, that needs improvement for sure. Big needs improvement. But it's not just access, it's quality and it's care.
How do you define quality care, Dr. Lee? And then I want to ask you, Sharon, from the nurse's perspective, with all due respect, when I was in medicine, we know the doctors are the doctors, but the nurses would often say, yeah, they go through rounds and whatnot, but it's us to get there. Nurses can come in and doctors having a long time, the term putting a line, putting in an IV. Am I honest here? And used to be on a unit there. Nurses are very, very familiar. So I want to hear your perspective, but then also as this nurse navigator about the impact of what Dr. Moy just said, because it is really real. When we, in the earlier panel about the trauma, some people, and we haven't even talked about the fact, this is more of a panel where we're talking about the impact of not being screened over the past 2 years with COVID on top of all the other issues that you named. And so Dr. Lee and then Sharon.
So quality care absolutely starts with, having good quality primary care, someone who listens to you, someone who does the appropriate screening. Now, our primary care colleagues are incredibly busy and incredibly overworked, and I can't do what Dr. Alabre does.
I was going to say our Dr. Alabre is overtaxable, but he holds it down as much as he can.
Exactly. It starts with excellent primary care, which is also very limited in this country, which in this state, in America, primary care.
Shortage, yes.
There's a great shortage
of physicians.
Clinicians, you name
all
it.
clinicians,
APPs,
nurse practitioners,
NPs.
AP. Yeah, okay.
So it starts there. It starts with the clinicians also having the time to be up to date with all the recommendations that come along with things like cancer screening. and then moving along to the next specialist who needs to help out with, managing the care. I think, but quality takes there are a lot of different definitions, but I would just say that a cultural understanding at your hospital about how we're going to manage this patient, whether that's the little microcosm of the doctor, nurse practitioner, nurse navigator, physician's assistant, and understanding how we're going to help this patient understand their disease and how we're going to go from understanding to actual treatment. So actually, I want to pass it to Sharon because I actually think that at MGH in particular, you all have lessons for us all to think about the culture shift of a hospital that really didn't take care of sickle cell disease and now has, and that's brought on a lot of challenges that I think your group has really met.
Many challenges.
She said many challenges.
To put her on the spot.
The pain is the biggest issue around sickle cell patients and the experience that they have.
Which causes the request for narcotics.
Exactly.
Yes, okay.
So it's a blood disorder. Their red blood cells sickle when they're under stress, or if there's like oxygen levels that are lower, that it causes your blood cells to sickle. So your blood.
Can I ask what that means for my own learning? When your blood cells sickle, in layman's terms.
So a normal red healthy blood cell is round in
Yeah.
color, in shape.
Yeah.
Okay. And that allows it to hold a substantial amount of oxygen to circulate around your body and get your organs and your tissues, everything, the oxygen that it needs to survive and be healthy. Right? So when you're in a sickle cell crisis, a lot of your blood is sickling the red blood cells. So they form like a shape of like a C shape. So it can't carry the amount of oxygen that your body needs to function.
And it can't.
So it's kind of like a crescent shape.
Yep.
Okay. So it's just not, it won't have the capacity to carry the blood, the oxygen to your tissues. So that causes pain, tissue death, essentially, in different areas. It could be in any area of the body. And it's not something that you can test with a blood, with a blood test or see on an X-ray or a CAT scan. It is the patient's report of what is happening in their body. So I think around that, there's a lot of like, well, are you really in pain? And unfortunately, our patients live with chronic pain their whole lives for the most part, and they often don't look like they're in pain, and they have to function normally and live with a certain level of pain and are taking pain medications, orally to kind of function at home. And then when they're in crisis, it's a different level of pain, but they can't manage it at home. They come into us to get IV pain medications and hydration and to get them through that challenging time. And it can last anywhere from a couple of days to weeks. And unfortunately, the more crisis that a person has in their life, it's kind of like a vicious cycle. They're just prone to more crisis. Yeah. So that being said, they need care, longitudinal care over a lifetime. It's a chronic illness that it will not be cured unless they get a transplant.
So just to chime in, be the stem cell therapy also addresses sickle cell?
Yes.
Potential curability, yeah.
Yes.
The reason that's a highlight for me is because I know that sickle cell, I believe, is predominantly, what's the word?
It's predominantly seen in African
Americans, but I also learned in talking with our nurse practitioner, Leah, is that, or either online or maybe Dr. Lara, I was talking to someone, and also within the Southeast Asian community as well.
Yep.
Black and brown. But I never at least heard of, quote unquote, about the brown piece. And so, but I'm also learning, I didn't know that stem cell therapy, so even more so important that black and brown people register for the match. I'm sorry, go ahead, Sharon. I'm correlating in my tiredness as we go, and I'm like, okay, yes.
So because folks have chronic pain that needs to be managed over a lifetime, and they are frequently in and out of the hospital. And as a place like Mass General has not interacted or interfaced with this group of folks, and the opioid crisis did not help this. There's a lot of, so there's a lot of stigma around narcotics and opioids in general. So it just really affects the care that they get. They're often not believed when they come into the emergency room. They're often not treated well. And essentially, our role is to show up and interface with the medical staff and the nurses and kind of guide their care. Our medical director, Dr. Azar, is just really an amazing human, committed to, as we all are, raising the standard of care for these folks. So he has implemented a therapy plan for each patient that we have that outlines every medication that they should have, their hydration and their pain medication. So there's no question, you trying to tell the doctor what I need, and they're side-eyeing you. So it just puts it all there. There's a history about the patient, something about who they are as a person. We just really try to humanize folks because that's what's missing, right? So especially when you come into the emergency room as a person of color, you're in pain and you're just not being believed. And this happens over and over again. And you have to live with this disease that is not going to be cured. And where do you go for help? So it just, what we do is we show up, we cultivate relationships with our patients, they trust us. And at first it can be a little, challenging, but over time, folks come to appreciate, you asking about how's it going with their job, or, how's the family doing, and, just personalizing and humanizing folks and just validating that what they're experiencing is real and should be respected and honored, and they deserve the same care as any other person coming through the hospital.
And could I jump in too?
Yes.
And I think what Sharon said is so important. It's like over time, building the trust is really important by getting to know them, getting their needs met. And then we talk also about quality. What treatments are there to actually help? You heard about stem cell transplant or bone marrow transplants. That's not widely known that it could be potentially curative of sickle cell. We've got genetic treatments. Potentially curative, yeah.
Let's be clear, potentially. But.
And the same is true with stem cell transplant and bone marrow transplant and malignant blood cancers. So building that trust is the foundation for us to say, okay, here's what else we can offer you, like clinical trials, like these therapies, which are a huge burden on the patient. We totally get that. These are things that potentially could make them sick in the short term. They have to come to the hospital a whole lot more. And have to, really put their lives in our hands, but we have to earn that. We have to earn the ability to help them share that burden.
It's so interesting. We got if someone could just tell me, on the dot. Oh, we're a little behind time. All right. And so obviously, like the earlier panel, we're going to have to do a second part of this. And I really want to do a deep dive, maybe. So, and I think we had one session with you around prostate cancer, but even more so, we need to talk about testicular cancer. We need to talk about programs like yours and the Ellie Fund that, doesn't just do the clinical. What I'm hearing is there should be a movement in medicine when we talk about equity toward an improved quality of life. And as much as you said, I think about one other piece that I think you said it wasn't trivial or whatever. We want to presume that people are in medicine to do that. And it's not just about the clinical care, but it's the overall quality of life. So social determinants, folks with the Ellie Fund, being able to give somebody a voucher, to talk about access and getting to the doctor, catch a cab. I don't know, somebody donates theater tickets and you all can give a family, a night out, because there's the whole mental, and we didn't even get into a mental health space when it comes with dealing with cancer here. We are on an abbreviated time, and one of the tenets of Your Healthy Java is to allow the audience to engage and ask questions. We have time for 2 questions or statements. And so if anyone, this young man right here, please come to the mic because we're recording.
Jimmy, can we do 30 seconds?
While he's coming, come on.
I did my swab today for Be the Match. I had never done it before.
You did, wait. You did it at the Your Healthy
Today.
Java Health Fair? Come on, Dr. Nick. Yes, sir.
But it's so ridiculously fast and easy that I just wanted you to tell us how it's done so everyone knows.
Yeah. So joining the registry is really easy. If you're between the ages of 18 to 40, you can go
To 40?
Yeah, 18 to 40. Yeah.
They still registered me though.
That is rough.
I'm offended because I can't register.
People are like, are you serious?
Yeah, best thing to do is go to bethematch.org. You can connect with us.
BeTheMatch.org.
Bethematch.org. Yep. We can send you a kit to your home. And like Dr. Lee said, it takes a couple minutes, just a cheek swab. And then we'll process that kit and you're on the registry. So it takes a couple minutes to potentially affect somebody's life. So encourage everybody to try it.
Sir. I didn't know about the 18 to 40 though.
I'll be quick. I just had a quick question about prostate cancer because prostate cancer actually runs in my family. However, I know a lot of things are treatment is based off severity of the issue. I'm 36. I requested to be screened when I was around 30, and my doctor was like, no, you don't need to be screened. Check that in your mid-40s when you get to 40. So even when I asked them years past, they still haven't screened me. Now, I need to know how to effectively make my doctors are listening to me. What do I do?
Can I throw this in?
Real quick, it's because it's based on severity you get treated, but I don't want to get to that point where I'm severe enough to get treated. That's my problem.
Yeah. Amazing that you're advocating for yourself. And that's probably the number one thing that you should be doing. For men who are Black, African-American, the screening actually should start around 40. That's the national guidelines. For men with a significant family history, it can be even earlier. We don't actually have hard and fast rules on exactly when the screening should start. But I would just say that you should be, pushing even harder with your primary care doctor. I would say that Dr. Labre, if you had that sort of experience in your clinic with a young man with significant family history,
3 generations.
it probably would take very little for me to order a PSA test.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, and
before Brother Donald, go ahead, finish, sir, and then I want to say something.
Dr. Crawford from Fenn would also give you great advice. He's sitting 3 rows in front of you.
See these connections being made. Where, and anybody can, and I probably want, I don't know who between these two, or even our nurse navigator, where do you raise the bar of your advocacy? If your primary is constantly telling you, no, where, how do you navigate? Maybe it's automatically sharing. How do you navigate, I want my test?
So we have a sickle cell walk coming up next week, just a shameless plug.
Go ahead, please.
The name of our team is the Honey Badgers.
The Honey Badger.
The MGH Honey Badgers.
Okay.
We just keep
going.
We just keep plugging away at it, and we just advocate, and if you're not going to give us what we need, we'll figure it out.
So do you ask, let's do some practical. Do you ask a primary care, do they have attendings?
There are the physicians. Yeah.
Okay. So then in your particular case or anyone else, if the primary care doesn't send you to the screening that you want, you say, well, can I speak to your attending?
Well, they are attendings usually, but I think that what you can do is talk to people like Keith from Fenn who have the data that they may not be aware of and say, I did this research and I know that I've had 3 generations. My father's diagnosed at age 40. I should be, I'm just making stuff up now. Yeah. Like I should be screened, and I've talked to people, and this is something, and so if you advocate for yourself effectively with data, there's really no reason why they shouldn't do it. It's just, but it's also frustrating that you have to do that. And that's the bottom line. Yeah. So, and I think that, many physicians aren't like that. They'll listen to their patients, and there might be, but at the times, at today's fair, I've had many women talk to me about how they had to advocate for themselves because they felt something, and and it was ignored, and like, oh, it's gonna be nothing, and then it led to their breast cancer diagnosis. it breaks my heart that people have to do that, but I'm glad people do that because that's what ultimately saved their life.
If they give up, then
Yeah.
there'll be another death from it. Donald's our last question or comment.
That's exactly sort of what I wanted to speak about. I don't know if it's really in the form of a question. I know that time is limited, but it's certainly something that I feel needs to be said out loud, and hopefully this is a conversation that can be continued.
Yes, sir.
I like the fact that you said that you have to, as a physician and a healthcare worker, address cultural barriers. And I think what's not talked about enough is that there's an apprehension for folks to actually come in and get treated because there's psychic damage that's still pervasive in our community, because people will talk about Henrietta Lacks, people will talk about the Tuskegee experiment. So folks have an apprehension of actually being diagnosed or going to see a doctor, trusting a doctor. Then there's also the piece where people of color, and I can only speak about Black people as a Black person, but I do have friends that represent the various people and cultures that talk about not being listened to. There being like a coldness in the bedside manner of a doctor saying, hey, I'm telling you that my pain is at a 10 and you're not really addressing this. And again, like you said, there's stigma of, well, I'm in here for drugs. I'm like, I'm in here because I'm in pain. So there's a traditional sense that our pain is not being taken seriously. Oh, they can take that. And even in my case, he's a big strapping young man, he's fine, but how much of that is because I'm Black, right? And then the last part of it too is like, okay, how do we then address these and get our people, to the doctor? Because I hear a lot of this too, particularly with prostate health or what have you. You catch it early, 98% chance that it's cured. You don't have to worry about that. You just keep checking in with your doctor and you do that. But, Black men too, like I don't like people messing around in my nether regions. And then there's again, when I talk
Did you say in your dungarees?
I'm just saying, I said my nether regions.
Nether regions.
But
the regions.
Nether regions.
But also that's a cultural thing too, because again, we can talk about the bigger issue of there being psychic damage about our people being mistreated by healthcare, by government, what have you. So I'm very happy to see people of various walks of life and cultures represented here as healthcare individuals and doctors. We need more of those. We certainly need to have more people that advocate for mental health, because folks, again, I'm not going to a head shrinker because what are they going to do to me? I've heard stories, and you know how that's always like you think, I've heard that. But we have to absolutely take our health seriously, but we need our healthcare providers to listen and take our healthcare seriously.
Donald definitely summed it up, and it's past 2:00, and I already saw. We can thank you all for tuning in to this session of Your Healthy Java, and we will be back with you in the next 2 weeks. So everyone, it was a long session today. I just put in the comments, thank you to everybody that stayed in. I think it's important that we keep this information out there as much as possible. There was so much information shared, not only from a clinical standpoint, but also from a policy standpoint. And I will try to do my best to name all of the panelists. The first panel, Kovac Black, Dr. Claude Alabre, who was our medical director and co-host here in Your Healthy Java. Also, trying to go by memory, Dr. Ronke Pedersen, also Dr. Jean Lambert, and also Dr. Karen Abdul, that really, I could watch her session 2 or 3 times. And then on our second panel, we had Jason DeLeon from Be The Match, also Nurse Sharon, who's a nurse navigator at Mass General Hospital working in the sickle cell program, and also good friend, Dr. Rick Lee, who, if he's watching or anybody's watching from MGH, just tap him on his shoulders and ask him about his shoes. And then also Dr. Beverly Moy. And they are, we're going to actually have another conversation, as October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. On the 8th, I'm looking at my calendar. Today is the 4th. 2 weeks from today is the 18th. We're actually going to do a sort of an intimate session with one of the doctors from the Breast Cancer Center and also one of the programming and outreach workers from the Ellie Fund, which is a fund that basically supports those that are dealing with breast cancer. And I almost said women. We'll talk about this later, but women aren't the only one that deal with breast cancer. Some men, there have been men that have been diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I'm going to be very specific about that. That brings into the conversation trans women and trans men as well. And so even when it comes to prostate and breast cancer. So these are some conversations that are much needed within our community. And we're going to continue the conversation around breast cancer on October 18th. My baby sister, who is a survivor who just had another iteration of surgery last week, will be with us. And also one of the physicians from Mass General and someone from the Ellie Fund will be with us as well. And so we're going to cast that session on October 18th at 9 a.m. We will be with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. back for We Need to Know Wednesdays. And I believe that is it. Please tag people, especially those that are dealing with sickle cell, and you can kind of speed up and get the timestamp and say, hey, speed up to X, Y, and Z and hear some information about sickle cell. It is very important that Black and brown people continue to increase our numbers with the Be the Match registry. Now, I learned that, you know, they stop around age 40 because they want themselves to be, you know, vibrant, and I'm about 11 years non-eligible. But if you know folks that are 18 or 40, if you know family members of those that are dealing with sickle cell, get them to be a part of the registry, because that can help treat the sickle cell. All right. That's it for me today. Thank you all for tuning in for this extended version of your Healthy Java. And we will be back with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Again, thank you to everybody that was a part of the health fair. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Have a great day, everybody. And we'll see you again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Peace.